As the giallo boom of the late 1970s and early 1980s began to die out, the general approach to Lucio Fulci's work changed quite drastically. He had jumped around genres through the 70s, never landing anywhere in particular, but everything changed. In terms of popularity and probably quality, Fulci's career took a turn for the better after the success of Zombie Flesh Eaters in 1979. Not just because he was able to finally establish a niche he would become synonymous with, but because it allowed him to churn out a number of memorable films in a very short period of time before his eventual and drastic decline. Zombie makes the Gates of Hell trilogy possible stylistically and in some ways the New York Ripper as well, because Fulci's violent aesthetic was finally able to actualize. These films will be discussed in later podcasts, but until then, I am the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast.
The boat can leave now. Tell the crew.
It needs to be noted that those who call Fulci a copycat seem to get more fuel for this rather unfair accusation from Zombie than any of his other films. And it is incredibly unfair. Fulci's work tended to be quite unique even when borrowing from others, because he would combine elements of various times and places, but still insert his own style. With George Romero having moved zombies away from their Haitian folklore origins, Fulci eventually brought them back to their origins, despite being perceived as simply copying Romero's work. Quote, in order to capitalize on the success of Dawn of the Dead, which had been released in Europe as Zombie, in August 1979 Italian release, which brazenly bore the title Zombie 2. Their quote is from Inguanzo. While the unauthorized use of the title was overtly or obviously an attempt to sell the film, this has led to a false perception that Zombie drew on many things related to Romero's film. As Inguanzo explains, prior to Night of the Living Dead, zombies had been almost exclusively derived from Haitian folklore and were associated with voodoo cults and mind control. Indeed, after a rather clumsy opening act set in New York, Zombie soon moves on to an obscure island setting in the Caribbean where folklore and superstition is rife. In short, it is a throwback to early zombie films of the 1930s and the 1940s. But I want to go a little bit further than that. From a person doing a lot of podcasts on the work of Fulci, or Lucio Fulci, it is quite, I would say it's quite remarkable that at one point I had very mixed feelings about this film. Remarkable because now I find it so incredible. I had mentally thrown it into the B movie basket of slightly silly but admittedly fun zombie films of a particular budget and era. I always considered it one of the greatest visual zombie films, and the zombie versus shark moment to be one of the most extraordinary scenes ever created in any film genre. However, I had still underestimated the quality of this film to an embarrassing extent. Having watched it again specifically to write this podcast, it occurred to me that I have never seen any horror film that builds tension more effectively than Zombie Flesh Eaters. I appreciate that it's a big statement, but the steady upping of the stakes, the unfolding of the extent of the disaster, the sense that the characters are not in Kansas anymore, as it were, is cinematic mastery of the highest order. This is without even mentioning the music. At the very start of Zombie, we are placed instantly into the new Fulcian world. It is surreal, uncanny, and ominous. A hand holds a pistol, pointing it towards the camera and us. Ominous jungle drums play in the background. A sheeted and roped figure rises on a bed. The man holding the pistol shoots the figure in the head. We zoom out to a very shadowy Richard Johnson, or Dr. Menard, in a wooden building with large trees and palm tree leaves in the background. "The boat can leave now," he says. "Tell the crew." We cut to a black screen with the word zombie written on it, and the tapping sound of an iconic horror score begins. Its ominous horror kicks in as the opening credits roll. I don't have to convince any Fulci fans of the brilliance of this beginning. It is cinematic perfection. We are met with curiosity, uncertainty, and of course pending doom. If the zombie film has one most universal element, it is a sense of the inescapable. Within 20 seconds, Fulci has already established this. We have now entered a new era, that of Fulci's mastery of atmosphere. In this scene, there is no sense that the end has come yet, but the extraordinary score lets us know it is indeed coming, and there's really nothing that can be done about it. From here, Fulci slowly but surely increases the tension, as if turning up a dial, until by the end of this film, all seems lost. In the opening scene, we were away from safety, in some kind of jungle with unclear people and events. When the credits end, we are back to at least some kind of familiarity, a familiarity the film will spend the next 90 minutes destroying. We now find ourselves in New York Harbor, with its iconic, distinctive pre-9/11 look. We follow a boat for a while from different angles. There is no music, just the sounds of wind, the ocean, and empty cans rolling around the boat. It is intact, but seems to be abandoned. We might be in a familiar setting, but something is off. The film never allows us to feel comfortable in this way. We see New York, but from the ocean. We hear authorities communicating with each other about the boat, giving us a sense of safety, but this is very much short-lived. Two harbour patrolmen approach the boat with some casual, goofy dialogue. "Yeah, she looks abandoned. The only question is why. Hey, if she is, Marty, we stand to make a nice little bonus when we bring her in." But this does little to ease the tension. We see a helicopter point of view Dutch angle shot of the boat behind the approaching patrolman. We know nothing good is happening on this boat. The two goofs enter the boat, which is a mess. There is rotten food and the sound of flies, an introduction to the disgust aesthetic this film regularly treats us to. The younger man, or the younger of the goofs, notices some millipedes as we hear an aggressive synthesized score. He then sees a severed, rotted hand before a large zombie bursts through a door and attacks him. A strained, high-pitched, one-noted score adds to the discomfort, and the zombie bites him through the neck. Rich blood streams out. The zombie exits the cabin, and the other patrolman tells him not to move. The zombie slowly approaches the patrolman, who eventually shoots him, and he falls into the ocean. All through this scene, the high-pitched score continues. When the zombie falls into the water, we hear a very deep note before the camera moves towards the city. The stakes have been raised. This is how zombie works. Significantly ratchet up the stakes and tension, then ease off slightly. Repeat until there is nowhere for the tension to go anymore. Tapping into our sense of curiosity, the film now introduces us to our main protagonist, journalist Peter West. He is directed by his news editor boss, of course played by Fulci himself, to investigate the death. Then we meet Anne, the daughter of the boat owner, and Peter West's eventual love interest. She is questioned and mildly intimidated by some petty police, including one who seems to imply Anne knows where her father is. It is all rather silly. Thankfully, this section of the film is relatively short, albeit necessary. After all, the voodoo-esque zombie film is clearly Fulci's main interest here, but through the lens of how it relates to the familiar modern world. This was still of crucial importance. These characters are generically late 1970s New York, at least it seems in the way Fulci understood Americans, a British journalist and a local damsel. The iconic last moments of the film would mean far less without at least some New York sensibility. Whilst it might be a fairly rudimentary and inaccurate depiction of New York life, the why is more important than the what. Fulci wants us to be uncomfortable, be it through a pending zombie apocalypse, intimidating police, or good old racial tension. The film simply never allows us to breathe. There is even a subtle subtext of slavery throughout Zombie. Two coroners examine the body of a dead officer, or of the dead officer we saw killed earlier in the film. The older of the two, who is white, treats his black co-worker with arrogance and contempt. Having established the younger doctor believes the man was killed due to a laceration of the jugular, the older man simply gestures for him to have a closer look with a particularly patronizing finger gesture. To me, it's quite obvious what caused it. There appears to be clear indications of one or more bites. Then quite aggressively, look carefully. When the man indicates he cannot see the bites, his superior quite dismissively says, "Pass me the scalpel," and then lambasts his subordinate for not having kept the cadaver in good condition. We see another version of this later in the film. Dr. Menard, from the opening scene, holds an air of superiority to the film's Caribbean setting. He utilizes a local man known as Lucas for assistance around his hospital on the island, which is host to many sick people. While Lucas regularly tries to warn Menard not to disrespect local superstition, Menard is adamant there is a rational explanation as to why the dead are coming back to life. As the remaining people in the hospital pass away and Lucas tends to them, Menard finally yields to the possibility of the existence of voodoo before ultimately backtracking once again, telling Lucas that the idea of the dead coming back to life is just a stupid superstition. A powerless Lucas tells him sarcastically, "Yes, you are right, Doctor. You know many more things than Lucas." Fulci seems to be leaning on American tensions of the time. The zombies are the ultimate result of this build-up of tension. There is a brief scene in an airport with Peter telling Anne their Caribbean destination is around 3 hours away. This represents the move away from the familiar, but like the general tone of the film, the shift is slow and steady. They arrive in St. Thomas and we're treated to some casual reggae tunes. My apologies. Peter bribes a local taxi driver for information about where they can find a boat, and our initial fears that New York-based that this New York-based couple are entering dangerous territory is briefly assuaged. The boat that they come across belongs to two Americans, after all. We are then treated to one of the most implausible scenes in a movie premised entirely on implausibility. Our protagonists meet the boat owners, Susan and Brian, who are on a lovely holiday and simply tag along for the ride, despite Brian warning against the cursed island Matul, in which they are going to. Perhaps this absurd scenario is lazy writing. I mean, after all, why would these two holidaying, this couple, simply allow another couple to come along with them? But it doesn't so much matter that it's absurd. I mean, the whole film is rather absurd. But either way, the film continues its method. We move further from safety with a slight safety net of familiarity, in this case, fellow Americans. But as they leave, the reggae music is replaced by the jungle-esque tones of the opening scene. The tension continues to build. We soon witness the first of the two famous moments from this film. A more naked than necessary, Susan decides to go scuba diving. She takes some pictures, and the imagery is beautiful. But the music tells us not all is well. It is high-pitched, slightly distant, and has something of an echo. Soon, Susan is followed by a shark, and anyone who followed horror cinema in the 1970s knows that this is the punchline of an underwater scene in a horror movie. The shark, that is. And what he does to the swimmer. But the strained, eerie musical cues give us a sense that something else is afoot. Eventually, the main theme accompanies the aquatic theme, as Susan seeks shelter from the beast. As the main theme takes over entirely, a seemingly human hand grabs her from behind. Now, keep in mind, she's underwater at the time. She's completely submerged. To her shock, a man is down there with her, with no scuba gear. It has to be acknowledged here, this is horror film mastery. The previous half an hour has been entirely building to this moment. The foreboding, ominous theme was to be avoided, but now we know why. The struggle between Susan and the zombie evokes a sexual assault, both in terms of Susan's nakedness and the way the zombie grabs her, at one point almost appearing in a dominant position. It is a subtle moment, easily forgotten because of what immediately follows, but it should not be ignored. Peter treats Anne with an almost condescending smugness at times. Susan is attacked just minutes after undressing, and the same is true for Menard's wife, Paola, later in the film. As always, Fulci is more than just gore. Of course, the zombie versus shark scene thrusts the film so far into the realms of the absurd that social commentary seems irrelevant for a few short moments. This is horror theatre, again, of the highest order. The zombie wrestles with the shark, attempting to bite through his flesh. A lengthy struggle ensues, and the theme probes the action. Eventually, the shark manages to bite off a large section of the zombie's left arm, and the struggle is complete. In a film that has been battling between the absurd and the normal up to this point, the absurd has now won. Hereafter, anything goes. Zombie vs. Shark is the moment that Fulci officially enters into the surrealist gorehound genre. But he's not completely there just yet. Once again, in this film we are dealing with pure, unadulterated gore, at least some of the time. There are themes here too. As much as the nudity in Zombie feels, and probably is, entirely gratuitous, it is in line with horror trends at the time that naked women must be punished. We see Paola showing for a few, or should I say, we see Paola showering for just a few seconds longer than necessary, putting us in the position of the voyeur before a zombified hand is seen slowly moving towards the window. She is being watched. High-pitched, chaotic music begins, and we remember eventually that this is not actually pornography, despite the amount of nudity. Like Susan before her, Paola is very quickly made into a sympathetic victim after we see her unclothed. It might be voyeuristic, but it is also sympathetic, which is just as well, because the punishment is brutal. Having already been patronized by her husband, Paola reluctantly swallows a pill he had insisted she take. She had attempted to refuse, but she seems to be back under Menard's control. Immediately, as if it were linked, Paola hears a very strange noise coming from outside the house. Soon, a zombie is pushing its way in. To her, to her relief, Paola manages to sever the hand with the door, but she is far from safe. The zombie keeps coming, smashing the other hand through the door and grabbing Paola's hair. She is dragged slowly towards a very long splinter that the camera forces us to look at for excruciatingly long seconds. Paola is dragged closer and closer to the splinter until it enters her eye. The scream is horrific, as are the visuals. The splinter rips her eye apart. It is too it is too simplistic to only consider this from a gore perspective. Paola is controlled by her husband. She does not want to be on the island, and eventually she is murdered brutally. This is not a film that usually hides its perpetrators, and yet we never see the face of the zombie who kills her, only his arm. We might read this symbolically. She's not attacked by a random zombie, but by those who would punish a naked woman, perhaps like Michael Myers. The gore is unforgettable, as is the awful feeling of knowing that Splinter is coming. This is something of a preview of the next Little Fulci era, a mixture of the surreal gore of the Gates of Hell trilogy and the brutal punishment of naked women in the New York Ripper in 1982. But those are for later podcasts. The tension has been almost entirely released at this point. We understand the extent of the violence as well as the thematic tensions. Something from outside is threatening the norm and threatening safety. The film has lent on gender, racial, and even locational settings, or issues, should I say. Now it exists, or should I say, now it exits the familiar entirely. A fast-paced, possibly xylophonic theme plays as we see the boat approaching the island. The camera zooms out to reveal the boat positioned between two trees as if in their clutches. A zombie point of view, a heavy breathing shot creates a sense of hostility. As they approach, we cut to a drunken Menard lying on the beach. An assistant approaches and they have a tense discussion about voodoo. Menard does not want to believe it, but we investigate the phenomena, right? Even science cannot be trusted in this God-forsaken place. Something strange happens at this pivot point of the film. It seems as if it realizes that the audience never actually cared about this supposed plot. Peter and Anne are, after all, on the island to investigate what happened to Anne's father. Our four heroes find themselves in a car with Menard, who simply explains Anne's father died and came back to life. We cut to Menard executing the reanimated cadaver before he delivers the same line from the start of the film. The boat can leave now. Tell the crew. But this time, it is far more casual. He is no longer a shadowy mythical man. He is just a drunken, failing scientist. There is a brief pushback from Anne, Peter, and Brian about voodoo, but Anne seems completely unmoved by the news. Is this narrative oversight? Had she already accepted the fate of her father? Well, I suspect it isn't narrative oversight. The generic investigation plot is merely a vehicle to introduce us to the supernatural, as is the death of Anne's father. That we see it in flashback form gives it an air of legitimacy. Any sense of silliness so far in the film, however, feels superseded. The supernatural wins out. From this moment, the film exists within a supernatural, voodoo-inspired haze. We regularly hear chanting and rituals from the natives, but we never see them. It is not even clear if these are diegetic or non-diegetic sounds, which seems to be the point. Fulci is now a director of supernatural horror, and plot, often be damned. At Menard's behest, the four heroes arrive at a cottage to check on Paola. Lest we forget the splinter was the end of her story, or should I say, lest we lest we thought the splinter was the end of her story, we're subject to one of the most brutal images ever shot to that point in horror cinema. A dead, bloodied Paola is surrounded by four zombies. They slowly eat her flesh, vital organs, and intestines. The camera lingers just a few seconds longer than necessary, a Fulcian specialty. The chewing and flesh ripping sounds are very visceral. The opened eyes of this poor dead soul remind us of her bad treatment earlier in the film. It is horrific enough, but the extra emotional weight makes this a particularly difficult to watch. But ultimately, the gore and the violence wins out. Anne and Peter attempt a very brief little make-out session. Apparently, they have managed to fall in love during these tense times. But a zombie hand quickly emerges and puts a stop to any generic narrative nonsense. It grabs Anne by the hair before an alone and terrified Susan is attacked by a worm-ridden zombie. Blood flows from her neck with another horrible sound effect. Then she dies. The blood splatters down and across her body in a very similar pattern to Paola. The bodies of the two subjects of the gaze have both been effectively turned to meat. Within seconds, Peter understands there is no time for sentiment. Brian, don't you understand she's dead? There's nothing you can do here. The three survivors leave Susan behind, because what other choice did they have? For the next 78 seconds, in film time, zombies slowly rise from the ground as the main theme plays. Now, we understand what the music at the start of the film meant. It was ominous and fear-inducing, but now we know why. From the opening moments of the film, this music feels inescapable, as if whatever it represents cannot be defeated. The continual raising of the stakes created by the use of a range of musical cues, narrative tension, and even subtext usher Fulci into a different era. His once intricate giallo narratives have been replaced by visceral horror. His complicated protagonists have been replaced by figurative cardboard cutouts of characters with clear, basic motivations. And this is exactly what this era required. No one escapes in these movies. The horror is all-encompassing, just like the theme. It is perfectly appropriate that the final moment of the film unfolds the way it does. Zombies wander atop the Brooklyn Bridge, very slowly towards the New York CBD, as the main theme plays out. It reminds us that we began in New York, in the familiar. It reminds us that this threat was never confined to some obscure Caribbean island. It sets the scene perfectly for the Gates of Hell trilogy, where the normal becomes overwhelmed and encompassed by the supernatural. So, that concludes the formal part of this podcast. What I want to do now, and I'll maybe break out slightly from my more formal tone, although it's quite difficult to do, is I want to let you know about some news, if we can call it news. But I think some potentially exciting, let's call them announcements, or maybe there'll be announcements soon. So, as my loyal listeners know, I do an episode once a month. And I'm happy. I have been happy with that in the past. I have other podcasts as well. You should definitely check out the Horror Film Science podcast. I do an episode of that once a month as well. But as it has been my want in the past, I've done these podcasts just because I enjoyed them, and with honestly no concern for analytics whatsoever, and to the point that I hadn't even really checked them. I quite honestly didn't know if anyone was listening at all, apart from the fact that I had a comment on the Anthropophagus episode a few months back. But out of just curiosity, I checked and realized I actually do have some loyal followers, which is absolutely fantastic, and I appreciate each and every one of you. I make quite a few impressions on Spotify each month, which is really, really awesome, and I'm really excited about. And I also am getting a little bit of a better idea about what works and what doesn't, or should I say, what is popular and what isn't. The previous episode I did on zombie flesh eaters was quite popular, so I hope this one is as well. Now, as I think some of you know, I am in the process of writing a book, and this was essentially the audio version of what is sort of the first draft of Chapter 7. There will be 12 chapters, which, as you'll know, means that there'll be another 5 podcasts on this particular topic or on this particular book. But the good news is Chapters 8 and 9 are basically already written, which means I'm going to be doing more episodes more quickly. I think given the popularity, or well, should I say the steady, smallish popularity, the humble popularity of this podcast that I really, really enjoy doing, I have decided to do it a little bit more often. My plan is to do an episode next Sunday as well, and then an episode the Sunday after, and then potentially settle in, God willing, to an every fortnight routine. I've got plenty of content coming, and I'm very, very excited about it. I also plan to add more, a greater presence on social media. And by greater presence, I mean a presence on social media. So at this stage, I am planning to do an Instagram, The Italian Horror Guy, and likely a Facebook, The Italian Horror Guy. So please do get around that, but I'll have more details around that next week. And I feel like there's something else that I needed to announce, but cannot think about it. Well, I guess I'll say it's a small-ish but highly dedicated community is the Italian horror community, which means, I'm guessing, that over time, many of my listeners, you likely know some other people who like to, who appreciate all things Italian horror content. I know that I'm one of those. So if I can ask but 20, 30 seconds of your time, get in contact with anyone you know that loves Italian horror and say, check out the Italian Horror Guy podcast. He has a wonderful Australian accent. Say whatever, tell them whatever it will take to get them listening to the podcast, because I really, really want to grow it. And as I've mentioned, I'm writing my book. I believe that I have a potential publisher. And if that were to fall through, then I would try others. And if all of those were to fall through, then I will most certainly attempt to get it self-published, because I'm determined to do this. I'm really, really enjoying this podcast. I'm really enjoying the research, the watching, the analyzing. I'm enjoying the fact that as much as it probably feels at times like I think I know what I'm talking about, I don't always know what I'm talking about, and I'm confident on that. I'm excited by the occasional comment that I'm getting. I honestly didn't know Spotify comments were even a thing until this podcast, but when I'm on social media, I do hope to get a little bit of a following there and maybe generate a little bit of discussion. I love all discussion around Italian horror cinema. I love the highly academic, I love the analytical, and I love just the pure fan service, because I fall into all of those baskets and I absolutely love it. So I encourage you to keep listening. I encourage you to go back over old episodes, even though I do believe in some cases the quality has fluctuated. Maybe even today it's going to fluctuate, but I also intend on upgrading a little bit of technology. So hopefully I can keep bringing you better and better quality stuff. That's hopefully better than the quality of that sentence. But as I say, shout it from the rooftops. Get everyone that you can possibly think of who might be interested, or even people that wouldn't be interested, and force them to listen to the Italian Horror Guy podcast. I really want to grow it, and at some point, I would really love to have some guests on, if that's at all possible. So keep all that in mind. Keep listening. I appreciate all of you. It's really, really great to have a little loyal following. And when it blows up one day, you guys can all be the people that are like, hey, I loved the Italian Horror Guy podcast before it was cool to love the Italian Horror Guy podcast. But outside of that, as I say, I really do appreciate everyone listening. I appreciate the encouraging words. I'm struggling my way through this. I'm trying to be as articulate, as smart, as technologically viable as I can possibly be, but there's a lot of work to do. But it's a good little community. It's a very encouraging community, and I encourage you guys to keep growing it. I'm having a great time, and I'll be bringing you more content and content more frequently. So I really look forward to that. Thanks so much for listening. I love you all, and it won't be next month. It'll be next week that the next episode is coming out. So tune in for that. But until then, I'm the Italian Horror Guy, and I have been this has been the Italian Horror Guy podcast. Join me next week, guys.